Those information that you had access to, those books that you made mention of, and those people who came to tell you about African story, how much impact did it had on you, and how much impact do you think have on the people as they grow up?
Yeah, I think it hit other people differently, but I was actually in the eighth grade when Trayvon Martin was killed, right? And I remember we had this student in our class that she was black, but she wanted to be white or something. She had some type of complex, right? That happens sometimes. You have some African people that will swear that they're white or swear that they're not African. And she was one of them at a young age. And I remember her saying something to the effect of, "Oh, that's what he gets. Like he should have never had a hood on. He probably had a gun, whatever the case may be. He got what he deserved, and he was killed by a police officer that I think was off duty, right? George Zimmerman, it was." And I was just I was like, "How could this happen?" Like he was nearly our age at the time, and I was upset. And then when she said that, it was like a surge of rage came over me. And then I saw that everyone around me in my class wasn't saying anything. Everyone was silent, and I was the only one who was like willing to go to battle with her right then and there, because I was like, how could you say something like that and you're in a school that's predominantly African, right? It doesn't make sense. and and that mindset like was just so, it like broke my heart, because it was like that was a young African boy, you know what I mean? And I think that example describes how the information we were being told impacted me versus other people. Some people, it just made them want to be, and I'm writing a manuscript on this now, but it wanted them to assimilate into this hierarchy, right? It just wanted them to become the oil of the machine which oppresses our people. It scared them. like like they were running off of fear. A lot of them ended up running on fear, and they just want to protect their nuclear family, if even they can do that, right? So they're just trying to join the capitalist system. Some people will try to, what's the word, deflect from being African, like turn away from it, submerge themselves with their white counterparts, whatever the case may be, want to integrate. And then the other option is to want to create unity amongst your own people, and want to educate your own people and empower your own people so you can create your own communities and institutions. And I think that's the three things you got. You got fear, you got the assimilator, and then you got the warriors.
Thank you so much for that. All right. Now, I talk to you as a scholar, so I'm going to ask from a definition from you. The term Afrocentrism is something that a lot of people make use of, and I think you have made mention of it up to like two times in your explanation. Can you give me a definition of it or a description of it? What does it mean by Afrocentrism or Afrocentric? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, a person that coined that was Professor Malifi Ashante, who's currently at the Temple University. And I had the pleasure of talking to him recently, and how he described Afrocentricity is being, anyone can be a part of this paradigm of Afrocentricity, right? Like it's the idea of bringing agency to a group of people who have been discriminated against, and to bring in the narrative that has been silenced nearly, right? Our narratives have been silenced for hundreds of years. So it's bringing an agency to the African perspective. But it's not really only for the African perspective, it's for the global community, because being African doesn't mean that you're just only prioritizing African, you're prioritizing humanity, right? Because what's happened to our communities is inhumane. It's a form of genocide, although the Genocide Convention won't realize that or say that, right? So that's really what it is. It's bringing agency to a group of people who have been harmed.
So you said that the word genocide would be used in terms of how the African have suffered. I don't know. Can you say something more about that? Because looking at today, of course, we talk about 6 million Jews that were massacred by the Nazis. But if we look at Africa, far more than that have actually happened, but we don't usually use the word genocide to describe what has happened to the African people. So I'm trying to understand in what context are you saying it's not really used, is that it's not qualified to be used, or help me understand that.
Yeah, so I was actually talking to a professor recently. His name is Jeremy Gunn, and he's currently in Morocco, where I am. And we were discussing, and he was someone who had studied law, and he was actually in the law field in DC and for constitutional law and human rights. And I was asking him, okay, so could the African people sue the corporation United States of America for their genocide that has been placed upon them? And they were like, he was like, oh, well, it's not feasible. You can maybe sue them for the mass murder, but even then you have the ex post facto laws that need to be considered, right? Because there's a certain time frame that you can't go back in the past and say that, oh, you're trying to sue these corporations or this corporation for the illegal slave trade. And especially if it wasn't illegal at that time, although that it was, right? We know that. But then he was talking about how there's certain states that did have it legalized. And the way that they were able to go around that is because they created laws. They created legal codes to say that African people were considered 3/5 of a human. So technically, it wouldn't have been illegal at that time because they had created those types of laws. And then alongside with the whole genocide thing, the Genocide Convention was created in 1940, and it was specifically created for the case of what was happening to the Jewish people in Vienna. So they like that's particularly what that was for. And if we wanted to sum up everything that happened, like in not only in South Africa, but across the continent of Africa, including in the Americas and the Africans that were brought to the Americas, he was saying that it would not be considered, it would be nearly impossible to be able to do that, which I think is absurd, because that what has happened to the African people embodies the definition of genocide, right? And then it goes into the case of trying to prove it and trying to create those statistics and to lump something together. So what I realized in the conversation I was having with him is what he was doing was dividing up what happened. He was like, oh, well, if you want to say that, and then not to even mention the current legal cases that's been going on with different American corporations that have fundamentally failed when you're trying to get African people to sue different corporations in America, and it's not going through, right? Because these white companies have protections on them. Like the recent case of that is Nestle, Google, Apple, all these different things for child slavery, even, and child trafficking or human trafficking in general. Like they're not being prosecuted because the people who created the law, it was created to protect them. It was created to protect Caucasian people and Caucasian interests. It wasn't created to protect African people, right? On any scale. It wasn't created to protect the African in America, and it wasn't created to protect humanity in general. It was only created to protect a specific group of people. But in the case of the division goes, he was saying like, oh, well, if you wanted to prosecute the corporation for genocide of the indigenous Native Americans, then you can do that. But from what my scholarship tells me is that the Native Americans didn't identify themselves as Native Americans. They were indigenous, yes, but a lot of them look just as African as the African that's in Nigeria. You understand? So it's like it's that divisiveness and those racial terms that start to confuse and to try to make it almost impossible to be able to prosecute these types of institutions. And then another thing he tried to do is say, oh, well, think about Barack Obama. Barack Obama didn't have descendants of slaves. So even if you were to have that type of legal case and it was to go through, and then you were able to have reparations, which I think the correct term is restitutions, not reparations, would it go to people like Barack Obama who never had descendants of slaves? So how are you going to find all the people who had descendants of slaves and didn't have descendants of slaves, right? So it was a lot of confusion as to that, like creating confusion as to how that would go about. And that's the state that we're in. We're in the state of confusion. Like, so that gives you a little bit.
All right. So, and that state of confusion, if we understand it perfectly, is actually created to be like that. So, at least it helps the person who is oversee the confusion to get a better advantage of it.
Mhm.
So, a couple of weeks ago, actually, it should be over a month ago now, I interviewed a historian in UK of a Jamaica origin. Her name is Selena Carty, and she said exactly what you're saying. Because we talked about law, we talked about also history. In that when you make the law, looking at the case of the European descendant who are supposedly the lords of this world, when they make the law to protect themselves. They didn't make it to protect other people. So when other people then come and say, "Oh, you break the law," it becomes very difficult for them to get justice. So that,
Mhm.
Ben was also saying, the famous historian, what you are getting is just this, not justice. We cannot get justice from there. You are only going to get just this.
Yeah, exactly.